There are those in this country who still don't understand or choose to believe that we, the black African Americans slash whatever you want to call us in this country, are the Hebrews of old, that we are the chosen people of God. And that word chosen has rubbed a lot of people different ways, especially those whose egos are stuck on trying to have some type of status over another. In truth, we really don't care about that. We don't care about status over somebody else or what group of people are more special than the other. That belongs to another demographic. We understand that being chosen is a responsibility. It is a responsibility, and anybody that understands what that's about, being chosen isn't something you chase, because the weight of that responsibility is something you can't escape. And when you're dealing with God, it is legit. That being said, we understand that it was our ancestors that made a blood contract with God that lasts forever. That contract was made with God at His choosing, at His instructions, that we would be His people forever. Why? Because God wanted us to show the rest of the world, and this is our responsibility as a collective, then, now, and going forward. We were supposed to be, and we are supposed to be, the example to the world of what a working relationship with the Creator is about. I'll say that again for those who still don't understand why God chose us. It's not that we were super special. It wasn't that we had, I don't know. It wasn't anything more than God specifically wanting us to show the rest of the world what a working relationship with the Creator is like. So in that, by our example and through our example, we would bring and help bring other people into fellowship with God, because the ultimate goal is that God would have a relationship with all mankind, personal relationship with all mankind, the way He had with Adam and Eve. God wants with the descendants of Adam and Eve the very same type of close relationship that He had with Adam and Eve. And He chose black people in particular, the particular black people He chose, to be an example of that, which is why He instilled in us that deeper sense of connection, which is why innately we have that community connection, that soul that people talk about, that we talk about, that is that connection across the board, a deeper understanding of spirit, because that's the part that actually belongs to God. And in explaining that, and in showing that, and in living that, others throughout the world would be able to understand the beauty of that, which is why the influence that He gave us is still at work today through different means, music, art, different things like that, fashion, whatever. But that is God's gift. And the purpose of it was to show the rest of the world how to connect with Him. So, with being God's chosen people, our ancestors wanted to be like the rest of the world, and it's easy to sit back in a monotheistic world now, with the major religions, to look at a world in ancient times and kind of smirk, wondering why our ancestors would choose to be like everybody else or want to be like everybody else. But it's kind of like that kid who's not able to do what everybody else is able to do and wants so desperately to be like them. Our ancestors were living in a polytheistic world where the majority of countries and majority of society had many gods. And so they were the outcasts. Socially, they didn't fit with everybody else. And so, like a kid who sees everybody else getting McDonald's for lunch and they're eating, maybe school lunch or whatever, they felt kind of jealous and they wanted to be like everybody else, and they kept pulling in that direction despite God's warning. That, along with a number of other things, led to our punishment. Now, for those who don't believe that we are the chosen people of God, understand that God is consistent, that His punishment for His people, His children, have been consistently 400 years for the most part. Egypt, here in America, pretty much the same thing. That being said, understand that those numbers and the things that happen to us fall right in line with Deuteronomy 28, which was the terms and conditions of the covenant, the blood covenant that we made with God. And so God bringing us here to America and spreading us throughout the world is a fulfillment of that breached contract with him. Those who wish to identify as Hebrews already know themselves, for the most part, that they are the converts. What I mean by that is, in ancient Rome, in Jerusalem, Rome occupied Jerusalem, I believe during the time of Claudius, maybe Nero, one or number of Roman emperors dispelled the Hebrews, us, out of Roman territories because of the constant revolts, because of the constant threats to their society, and the complaints of those that lived in Roman society of the constant revolt of the Hebrew people. The Hebrew people were believing that God was going to come along and vanquish their enemies and allow them to return to a time of prosperity that they experienced under David, under Solomon. And God wasn't going to do that because of their disobedience during that time. That being said, Rome saw these revolts as something that needed to be shut down once and for all. So once our ancestors were kicked out of Roman occupied territories, particularly Jerusalem, just before that, the Ashkenazi, who are not Hebrews by nationality or by birth, came down from the Khazar region, the Caucasus Mountains, areas where they weren't doing that well, and came to Jerusalem, came to Roman occupied territories, and asked who was prospering and doing well in these areas. And the people there told them, the Hebrews. You need to see the Hebrews. So they came to the Hebrews and asked if they could work with them, work for them. And the Hebrews told them, in order to work with us, you have to be one of us. Why? Because things like the Sabbath, keeping the Sabbath and observing, the times and the feasts and the celebrations, they had to be in sync with them in order to work for them. So the Ashkenazi were more than willing to convert to Judaism in order to reap the benefits of the prosperity that the Hebrews were enjoying under God's blessings. Now, they were the shopkeepers, they were the people working in their stores, working, in their businesses. When the Romans, fed up with Hebrew revolt, finally kicked the Hebrews out of Roman occupied territories, it was the converts, the Ashkenazi, that took over those stores, took over those businesses, and assumed the identity, whether by plan or just by proxy, because they were already, working in those businesses, and they were still observing the rituals of the religion. They became known as the Jews. So the Hebrews, by birth, were kicked out of Roman occupied territories, and they left from Jerusalem, left from those Roman occupied territories, and came down to Saudi Arabia. And they continued to run their businesses, continued to set up shop, and God blessed them because they were his people. They are his people, and continue to observe his commandments, and they were blessed there. Now they ran into a young man named Muhammad, and Muhammad wanted to be a part of what was going on with them because they were prospering, but they told him the same, that in order to be with, work with them, he had to become one of them. Some type of conflict went down. Either he didn't want to, or they didn't want him, something like that. And he, along with some of his friends, started raiding some of the the Hebrew camps. And you can find information of that in the early part of the Quran, where he talks about the only good Hebrew is one who is paying homage or giving alms to, a Muslim. Well, sometime after that, he received a visitation from a holy one, and he was then declared a prophet. And so his occupational name went from being a raider to now, being a religious leader. And so the faith grew, his people grew, and the Hebrews saw that there really wasn't much room for them to be there anymore because of the constant pressure for them to basically vacate, get out of Dodge, because they weren't going to be a conflict with the growing faith. So they left from Saudi Arabia and came down to what we call Africa, which we really should call Al-Kabilan, the mother of all mankind. Because they looked like the people of Africa, because they blended in well with them, they came to their territories thinking that they were going to be received. But the already established tribes and people of these areas saw them a bit as a nuisance, because now they're hunting on their territory, sharing their land, and really not by invite. So a great number of these tribes didn't want them to be there. So you had tribes like the tribe of Dan, the fifth son of Israel, went down to what is Nigeria, and the Yoruba were already there. The indigenous people of Nigeria were already there, and the tribe of Dan settled there, and they changed their name in order to blend in. They changed their name to the Igbo tribe. And then you had a tribe that went to Ethiopia, Sierra Leone, what is the Ivory Coast, Benin, different places like that. The Levite tribe went to, I believe, Botswana. They are known today as the Lemba tribe. And modern DNA tests are proving all of that to this day. Now, to the shock and crazed dismay of those who claim to be Jews today, they are blown away that the DNA of these black people are much stronger in proving that they're Hebrews compared to them. And that truth, because blood and DNA doesn't lie, is really shaking up their view right now. But they are finally realizing what I am putting out there right now, that yes, the black people of the Americas are the Hebrews. Now, of course, some of our ancestors from Africa had already crossed the Atlantic and settled in America before this contract, before these things happened. So there's kind of a mix of all that. Those that we would call the indigenous of the Americas, who were here, settled here long before the people we call the Native Americans crossed the Bering Strait. It was those people that they met. If you talk to any Native American tribe, talk to the elders, talk to the people who know the history of their people, they will tell you that when they crossed the Bering Strait, they met a people already here in the Americas that welcomed them. And those people that they met were black. And those black people they met lived with giants that are buried in the mounds that are found throughout the country, especially in the northern states throughout the country. Abraham Lincoln spoke of it in the part of the Gettysburg Address about the mounds. You talk to any of the Native American tribes and ask them about the burial mounds, and they will tell you those burial mounds are not theirs. They belong to the people that they met when they arrived here. And underneath those mounds are giants. That being said, the Hebrews that were brought over here by ships that were financed by the shopkeepers, the converts, the Jews. Why? Because they wanted to ensure that the Hebrews, whose place and rightful place being Jerusalem, were kept as far away from their place of inheritance as possible, so they would not displace them in assuming their position and their status as the people of God. See, the ancient world understood very well who the people of God were. And with that, there was a point of respect that came with that. Well, these converts, shopkeepers, were able to assume that same level of respect because the true Hebrews had been displaced by the Roman Empire. Over time, it just became accepted that these were the Jews. Now, these convert Jews, financed the ships for the Portuguese, for the British and others, and let them know exactly where to pick up the slaves or pick up their help that was needed for these new colonies and free labor. Because when they came to the regions where the Jews lived, because if you look at the maps, the ancient maps or the old maps before the 1700s, 1500s and all, you will see that in West Africa, you will see the areas called Judah land. Judah being the term that during that time, in old times, ancient times, they referred to all of Israel as Judah. When we know it was Israel, but they just referred to it as Judah, which is where we get Jew from and everything else. Okay, so you will see how in those maps, how the Jews, the Hebrews set up their camps, set up their communities, exactly the way that God told them to do it back in Exodus. Kind of like in a Nautilus shell spiral setup, so that if they went to war, each one would spiral out by the hundred, by the thousands, by the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, sort of like that. And the very middle of all that would be the tabernacle where the Ark of the Covenant was. Okay. So it was the shopkeepers, it was the converts that financed the ships, and they told the Portuguese, the British, the Spanish, all where they could pick up their slaves. So they talked to the indigenous tribes that were there, who were more than willing to aid anybody who was going to expel these people that just showed up in their territory. So they made a deal with these people and helped them capture them to get them off of their property, basically. They saw them as squatters. They saw them as people imposing on their areas. They wanted to get them out. Their deal with the devil backfired on them, because in the colonies, in the Americas, there was such a demand for free labor, according to them, that those same people, when they captured the majority of the Hebrews, they went back and started taking people from the tribes. And when these tribes resisted and fought against them, they killed their leaders, cut their heads off, took their items of importance, to their kingdoms, and took them back to their countries. And they're still there to this day, subjugating the people in these tribes that made deals with them, both physically and psychologically. In that, the understanding was, if we can take your objects of power and kill your leaders and cut off their heads and take them to our country, then we have power over you. And it worked. And so these tribes that were willing to help these slave traders pick up the Hebrews suffered the same fate of those that they helped become enslaved. And you fast forward to today, and there are a number of these countries that have apologized for their role in the slave trade, and take from that what you will. But that's what happened. So we who were brought here in the Americas have fulfilled what God's breach of contract punishment was. So if you look from 1619 to 2019, that's 400 years fulfilled. And that's pretty much what has happened, which is why since 2019, there's been a great awakening among God's people, and the world has seen it, because it is time for restoration. Now, those who are in power now have felt the shift, know our history, that finally now we know, because they kept that from us. And that's why things like the Ethiopian Bible, the full 88 books, are being contrasted against the 66 books of the King James Version. and different things like that are happening right now, because this is a time of revelation. God is revealing, restoring, and bringing all this back. Now, that being understood and that being said, those that are trying to still cling to power and want to wipe out God's people before they come to full power, let me ask you, do you think God is going to allow them to be able to succeed? Sit with that for a second. And so, because we know how God works, these that seek to destroy God's inheritance before they're able to take their full place and their rightful place in their power, those that are in positions and have held positions of placement and posture and power in this world, feel the threat. And in their minds, the only way to get rid of the threat is to wipe it out, which is why God is giving us the warning now about them trying to wipe us out. But I'm saying all that to say, understand, if you have not already come to understand, who we, the so-called blacks of America — I really don't like that term, because black is not a race. You can't return to the country of black any more than white is a race. It's the other side of the coin of white supremacy. The idea of being white is the idea that they really can conglomerate all races that are lighter than tan under one banner and basically make up the rules of what that culture would be, whatever they would try to make it out to be, and call it a culture. And so by extension, the other side, they needed enemy, the other side would justify their reason for being established. Take that away and then there's nothing left. Take that away, the idea of a black culture, as far as not attaching or not being a part of any particular country outside of the Americas, outside of the place that we've been held as slaves behind enemy lines. And then you have no reason for white culture to exist. Because what is the quickest way to unite a group of people? Give them a common enemy. We've seen that throughout history. And so that is their whole point. That's why white supremacy has never, ever been far from the idea of being white. Why? Because when they have a common enemy, they can come together under one banner of hating black people, therefore uniting their interest and keeping their power structure. You see what I'm saying? Perhaps I'm not explaining it the best, but I think you have the gist of what I'm talking about. It is incumbent upon us, the so-called blacks of America, Africans in America, regardless how long we've been here, regardless how long we've wanted to detach from that because of the abuses we've experienced under our cousins, our brothers from the mother continent, we are still African by blood. Blood doesn't lie. DNA doesn't lie. Argue with your mama. That being said, it is incumbent upon us to find out where our people come from, exactly where your particular bloodline comes from, what country in Africa you come from. Yes, I said it and I meant it. You need to reconnect. You need to find out exactly where your people are from, because in that lies the strength of understanding your connection to the continent. This is a time of restoration. This is a time of reconnecting. Don't be left out. It's on you, and it's on your family and your people of your particular nationality, your lineage, your blood lineage, to reconnect with the continent. So, those who are in Jerusalem don't want their Hebrews to return. There are all types of laws in place. You're welcome to look them up as to why we would not have the right of return, even though by blood and by DNA, by even their own rules, we can. But I'm gonna leave you with this. Here's proof positive that we are the Hebrews. We are the rightful heirs of the inheritance. Remember how God told Abraham that what the promised land was and how his descendants would live in the promised land. So remember, Abraham had two sons. His first son was Ishmael, right? And then he had Isaac through Sarah, where we would then get Jacob and Esau, and through Jacob, his name being changed to Israel, we have the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, remember, under Abrahamic law in ancient times, the firstborn was the rightful inheritor of the father's property, correct? Okay, walk with me here. Abraham's descendants were to be and to live in the promised land. The Hebrews were dispelled by the Roman emperors because of their constant revolts and all these different other things. And Roman emperors were concerned that perhaps if they were under attack, that these Hebrews might side with or even sabotage their efforts to dispel an enemy from their territory and become a wartime liability. So they got rid of them. Now, inheriting and being in the land of inheritance. The children of Ishmael, the firstborn of Abraham, still live in Israel today. Many of you may not know that. I'm going to repeat that again. The descendants of Abraham through Ishmael, the firstborn of Abraham, still live in Israel today. Guess what color they are? That's right, they're black. So if the firstborn of Abraham was black, then it's obvious that he came through a black lineage and a black line and a black father. See, all of the nations around Israel, you want to know why Israel's always been under attack? I'll say the state of Israel, forgive me. For the point of this conversation and that going forward, we refer to it as the state of Israel. The reason the state of Israel has constantly been under attack is because all these nations, Syria, Libya, Jordan, Egypt, all these other countries around there have known for thousands of years who their neighbors were. And they know that their neighbors were black. So they know that they're imposters that are in that territory to this day. Again, proof positive what I was talking about, or to what I'm talking about. I believe it was the premier of Egypt in 1950 something said, I do not recognize the state of Israel because you left black and you came back white. Plug that in. The Ishmaelites, the brothers of, or the uncles of Jacob and Esau, was black, is black. His descendants are black and still living in Israel to this day. And the premier of Egypt said, I do not recognize the state of Israel because you left black and you came back white. These people have known for years who their neighbors were. The Palestinians, who have been murdered and, my Lord, the worst genocide we've seen in recent years in our lifetime. They know who their neighbors were. They were and are the descendants of the Philistines. It doesn't take much of a stretch of the imagination to understand and know. They know intimately who their neighbors were. Why? Because they were at war with them throughout ancient times. David and Goliath, anyone? Right. Israel lived right next to the Philistines. That whole area was called Palestine for years. Look at ancient maps, you'll see it. Even during the time of Jesus, that was Palestine. So, with these proofs, with these verifiable facts, you understand what the agenda of these groups of people are: to wipe out the people that can identify them as their neighbors, and to keep and suppress God's people who should return and who will, by prophecy, return to the land of their inheritance. Jacob's descendants, Israel's children, will return to the land of its inheritance by prophecy, by will of God. So anybody who's trying to fight against that are the children of who? Right. Not hard to figure out. Now you understand what's going on if you didn't understand before. And now if you are those that believe that you are the Hebrews, but you're not, now you understand the rest of the story and why the lie of the right of return had to be what it is, and why the laws of DNA in that country are kept at bay and against the law. Why? Because, quote unquote, it would disrupt the social order there. Yeah, it would, because it would prove that people who have the DNA to be from that country or be in that country are not being allowed to. Why? Because then those that are there and those that are still trying to establish their full power there would be displaced. Again, they were the converts, and many of them know it. Many of them have known it, but have tried to keep that from those who weren't really looking into that or savvy to follow the breadcrumbs. So now that the truth is out there, now that we all understand exactly what's going on, the question is, what are we going to do about it? In the end, God's will be done. God's people will return to the land of their inheritance. How that happens, only God knows. But this is the truth, and I have done my part in explaining it. So I hope this reaches whoever it needs to go to and adds clarity to any bit of confusion that may have been lingering in the minds of those who have either not understood or known who the chosen people of God are, why they're the chosen people of God, and what the agenda has been behind all of this going on in modern day geopolitics and what's going on in Jerusalem. God be with you. God bless you. And until next time.